All right, welcome everyone to the Iowa Ideas Conference. This is the session on local control, and we are within the policy track. I'm your moderator for this panel, Erin Murphy. I am the Des Moines Bureau Chief for the Gazette. Just as by way of introduction, I want to let you know our time together here for the next hour will include talking with our panelists. We'll address audience questions as well. So if you have any questions, put those in the chat. And all of our questions, all of our sessions, I apologize, have closed captioning access, and all of our sessions are being recorded. So welcome everybody. Again, I'm Erin Murphy, the Des Moines Bureau Chief for the Gazette, and this is the local control panel discussion. Before we get started, we have a sponsor for this discussion. We want to thank Inclusive ICR for sponsoring this panel. And at this point, I'd like to invite everyone to join us watching a brief message from that sponsor.
Hi friends, Angelica Vanetta, co-chair of Inclusive ICR. We are a coalition of over 220 employers in Eastern Iowa, all working together to grow the diversity and inclusion of our workforce, to create a space where employees feel a sense of belonging, included, and valued. Inclusive ICR is a proud sponsor of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion track of the Iowa Ideas Conference. As you participate today, be sure to connect with other Inclusive ICR champions, as we'd love to share information with you about our upcoming coalition meetings, projects, and how our work is impacting positive social change in our region. Be sure to check out our website at inclusivicr.org for upcoming events and our e-newsletter. Thank you and have a great conference.
All right. Thank you again to Inclusive ICR, and thank you everybody for your patience as we work through our quick little technical issues there. Wouldn't be a Zoom call without something like that, right? So again, thank you all for joining us here for this discussion on local control. I want to bring in our panelists and introduce them now. We'll start with, we have Alan Kemp, who is Executive Director of the League of Cities, organization that represents city governments across the state. Alan, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
We also have Bill Peterson, who is Executive Director of the Iowa State Association of Counties. And along the same lines, that group represents county governments across the state. Good morning, Bill, and thanks for being here. Oh, Bill, you're muted there.
Okay, thanks. I think the host was muting me because I tried unmuting, but great to be here, Erin. Thanks for inviting me.
All right, and we also have with us this morning Ross Wilburn. Ross is a state legislator from Ames and a former mayor of Iowa City. So Ross has the perspective of having been a mayor and now being at the state level where policy is set. Ross, thank you for joining us.
You bet. Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
We can. We hear you great. Thank you very much. All right. So I wanted to just kind of start with a big picture view to kind of ease into this. We talk about local control. It's obviously a pretty simple and self-explanatory term, but I wanted to give each of you a chance to describe what does local control mean to each of you. So Bill Peterson with the Iowa State Association of Counties, we'll start with you.
Okay, thanks, Erin. Yes, local control. So I'm not sure it's all that easy to define. It seems to be complicating to some people, but I think in a nutshell, without getting it all to the legal niceties of the Dillon Rule and Home Rule amendments, local control is really the ability of locally elected officials to determine the best circumstances for programs and services and other activities within their communities, whether that be cities or counties. So I think it just really goes back to making sure that those local public officials have the authority to make decisions that impact their communities.
All right, very good. Alan Kemp with the League of Cities. What does local control mean to you?
I think local control, Bill's right. It's a lot easier to talk about than it is to when you start digging into the details of it. From a city official's perspective, I mean, I think the idea is that you can have concurrent and harmonious exercise of power between the state and cities. And so the legislature, though, is would look at legislating in areas of statewide concern, whereas then cities and by extension counties, they would legislate in areas of local concern. And the benefit of that is that by having that local control, those officials are better able to tailor and fine tune the regulations to local conditions. So I think, that's what's important to cities in Iowa. And obviously we've got a home rule amendment, we being cities, and counties have a home rule amendment. And while they're not absolute, it is sort of the starting point whenever you're looking at these types of legislative negotiations.
All right, very good. And Ross Wilburn, state legislator and former mayor, what does local control mean to you?
Local control starts with our state code, and just getting a little bit down into the weeds, the state law specifies what powers cities and counties can or cannot execute. And overall, broadly speaking, it talks about these are the powers granted to cities and counties, as long as it's not expressly forbidden by state code, state law. And so, as Alan had mentioned, the opportunity to really have at the local level, whether that's county or city, the ability to pay attention to needs at the local area, whether that's economic, whether it's social, even recreational, and education, those types of things. So it's important, as long as there's a more common understanding as to what it might mean and the power of, then that's where we get in trouble sometimes.
Yeah, and I know there are some specific instances where this has come up in recent years, and we'll get to those. But again, as I kind of try to bring us into this broadly, I also wanted to so you've each defined what that term means to you from your perspective. We'll go in reverse order this time and start with you. Ross, why do you believe that, and I'm assuming here that you do believe that local control is an important concept, so correct me if I'm wrong on that, but assuming that you do believe that it is important, why is that? Why is local control an important concept?
Local control is an important concept because there are differences amongst our counties. There are some differences between our cities. There are certain infrastructure pieces that come up in a Des Moines versus a Red Oak, perhaps, or even some smaller communities. And if the state doesn't have the vested interest, broadly speaking, in helping manage those differences, then that's where it's important. Not only just like infrastructure, but what do the citizens want for that particular area? And I will even bring in school districts. Our school districts, the voice of the people is implemented and how they want their children the young people to be educated. I will say, I think it's important, and we'll probably get into this later, in terms of state law. I think there's certain areas where you hear business a lot talk about an even playing field, that that there's an equal opportunity for certain things to be carried out. And so, but I think in some areas it's important that state law sets the baseline, and then there may be the opportunity for at the local area. In the local areas to go beyond that. For example, our civil rights law, we don't want to have, statewide, we need to have a certain expectation in terms of civil rights and what is granted, what what cannot be done in terms of discrimination, bullying, et cetera. We certainly don't want to have that happening in certain parts of the state. That's why I guess I look at, in some cases of local control, as the floor.
Yeah,
in terms of state power.
Understood. And you are exactly right, Ross. We are going to get to that kind of topic, and very much sooner than later. So well done. Alan Kemp, to you, why do you believe local control is an important concept?
There's probably practical and philosophical considerations. Practical considerations are that we've got 940 cities in the state of Iowa, and those populations range from as small as 12, our smallest community, up to 230,000 in Des Moines. And so the conditions and the expectations that citizens have in those communities are going to vary greatly. And so local control gives those local elected officials then the ability to sort of tailor what their community looks like. And that gets to the philosophical area that, local officials, city council members and mayors are going to say, look, we're elected the same way as a legislator, a governor, a congressman, and this is our area that, we sort of work within, and we can tailor again the regulations, that are of local concern to what our citizens want. And they tell us what they want by either voting for us and through other means of attending council meetings, reaching out in between meetings, whatever. And so I think local officials feel city officials feel they've got a pretty good handle on what their local citizens want.
Bill Peterson, anything to add to that these gentlemen didn't already cover? Why is local control an important concept to you?
Yeah, I think it's important. So I've been talking to lots of boards of supervisors and citizens group over the years about home rule and local control. And, I, for a long time, portrayed it as the ability just of local elected officials to make decisions. But a rather sharp citizen once pointed out to me, really local control is my ability to influence those decisions at the local level and have the elected officials that I put in office make decisions on my behalf. So it really does get down to the individual citizens' ability to affect issues and policies that affect them directly within their community. And, granted, there are some broad issues that require state regulation, state coordination, but I think that having those citizens and locally elected individuals make decisions for their communities results in a far better result across the state.
The government closest to the people is a phrase I often hear. Bill, is that what you're getting at there?
Yes, well, exactly. And one of my colleagues said, whatever you do, don't say that's where the rubber meets the road, because that's what everybody says. So I'm not going to say that, but there is a closer connection at the local level. Now there are opportunities, obviously, for citizens to meet their state legislators, their congressional folks, the governor, and other folks. But really, when you're in the day-to-day living within a community, you have greater access, maybe not so much in larger communities, but certainly in smaller communities across the state. You're seeing those folks at the grocery store or wherever, the local Little League baseball game.
Yeah. Very good. Thank you all. And a couple of you touched on this. So you know what they say about great minds. My next question I had was about striking that balance between local control and surely there are times when a statewide law or regulation is appropriate. So how in your view do we find that balance? And we'll circle back to you, Ross Wilburn, and start with you, not just because you touched on that a little bit, but also because, again, you've been in both spots. You've been a mayor of an Iowa city, and you're now a state legislator where statewide policy is being made. So from your perspective, how do you strike that balance? Where do you find the balance between issues that should be resolved with the statewide, law regulation versus leaving decisions to local governments, to cities and counties?
I think it starts really kind of where Bill talked about having impact and influence elected officials, in your community, on your block, in your county. And it's critical for all the our participants here. Let not only your city council, your school board, and your county, but let your state legislators in your area know how you feel it's important that some decisions be left at that local level. I mean, probably Osceola County maybe is the smallest county. I'll look to Bill for that, but it's got to be down, down there in terms of numbers. There are just going to be things in Polk and Story and Black Hawk County, Scott County, that just don't, it's not necessarily an issue that's going to be a problem or necessarily an opportunity in some of those smaller areas, and vice versa. There are going to be some laws that if the state passes that, I guess maybe at the local level, it might be, if it doesn't really do anything, affect anything, we sometimes call it a nothing burger. But I think and just the two organizations that Alan and Bill represent, it's just a dramatic difference in some areas. And so if you start to let regardless of your role, you do have an opportunity to talk to your state legislators, Senate, House, and the governor's office to let them know the importance of it. I mean, that's where you can exert that influence, that pressure, so that folks who are coming in newer to the legislature, when they hear local control, especially if they've never served on a school board, a county supervisor, or city council, they may not even know what it means.
Bill Peterson, you touched on this too. In your mind, where's that balance? Where's that line between what should be addressed at a statewide level versus what should be left to cities and counties?
I think that it varies a lot on the issue. But let me use an example of where I think in recent years there was state action that impacted local control, and that was on the prohibition for local governments to set a minimum wage. I think our current minimum wage statewide is like $7.25. There's, as has been alluded to, there's a vast difference between the size of our counties, the makeup of our counties, the economic well-being of those entities, same way with cities, and circumstances might demand different things in different locations. For example, Johnson County and several other counties, and I can't remember if any cities adopted increases in the minimum wage in their communities, but they felt it was important to increase the minimum wage for workers in their communities. The business community, and I think some people said, well, we don't like this fact that there might be different minimum wages across the state, but does the decision made by, say, Johnson County to establish a minimum wage, or I think they were scaling that in over a number of years, does that really impact Adams County or Lyon County, which are several hundred miles away? Is it going to steal workforce from those entities? I I don't believe so. And I think that was an example of where I think the state overreached, and local officials, elected officials, should have had the ability to respond to people in their community that were asking for those things, to put it in place without harming other individuals. I think one of the things you always look at is, well, what action are you taking that harms others? And I don't think in that case it did.
Let me follow up with you on that real quick here, Bill, because you represent, as does Alan, a wider range, as you guys have both talked about, a wide range of governments, of counties, and of cities with varied populations. When a bill like that was up in front of the legislature, how did your members feel about that? Were they okay with some counties having one minimum wage and others not? Or were there any concerns expressed by your members at that time?
Well, I can respond from our associations. I can say with certainty that there were several counties that said, well, no, we wouldn't increase our minimum wage to $10 or $12. But I don't think that they felt it was their concern if Johnson County or Lynn County or the other counties that adopted a similar strategy. I think the beauty of local control and giving individual communities or counties the ability to make those decisions lets them put in place a policy that seems to meet their circumstances. And, you know, it might create a little bit of confusion occasionally, but what isn't confusing in this world today?
All right, Alan, Kemp, I'll finish up with you on this one. How do you view finding that balance between where it's appropriate for a statewide policy versus allowing cities and governments to set their own policy?
I wish it was a bright line, but it never is. So for a couple of examples, smoking cessation, when the state stepped in, 15 or 20 years ago, there was a pretty significant discussion among my membership as to whether or not the league should be supportive of the state, simply making, smoking in public, illegal and regulating on a statewide basis, or whether that should remain a local issue that then city councils. And it really got, it sort of divided. There were individuals who said, look, smoking is a public health issue. It's a broad issue. Really, this is an area that the state should step into. Other city officials were like, no, we should really do this and tailor it to what our needs are. Well, times come up and we sort of learned to live with it. And so it sort of worked out. On the other hand, recently we've looked at, this area of like all-terrain vehicles and utility vehicles being on public streets. And so the state sort of stepped into this and certainly regulated areas that they had control over, but they were correct in leaving this up to the local governments to decide what do they want to do in their jurisdictions. And the reason for that is, and you can see it in the news, this week, there was an individual that was killed on a Des Moines street when they were struck by an SUV while driving a utility vehicle. Des Moines has too much traffic that it's probably inappropriate for those types of vehicles, to be there just because of the traffic. On the other hand, if I'm in Breda and I'm largely surrounded by rural areas, suddenly as a city council member, I can sit there and say, no, you know what, it's probably okay. We might be willing to allow these on, our city streets. And so it's never that bright line. So you're always sort of negotiating what really is truly this local issue that cities and counties can fine tune versus something that has an overriding, state issue, such as smoking or as Ross said, civil rights.
All right. Excellent. I want to take just a kind of a brief moment here to remind folks who are watching. First of all, thank you to everybody who's joining us. Thank you to our panelists who are here. Ross Wilburn, State Legislator and former Mayor. Bill Peterson, Executive Director of the Iowa State Association of Counties. And Alan Kemp, Executive Director of the Iowa League of Cities. And a reminder to everyone who's watching us right now, if you have a question for any of these folks or for all of them, go ahead and put that in the chat, and we hope to get to audience viewer questions later here in the session.
Erin,
But again,
I'm sorry.
Please go ahead, Ross.
Just a couple things that both Bill and Alan brought up. One, I had a flashback when Alan was talking, because I was on Iowa City Council when we passed a local smoking ordinance, as did the city of Ames. And that's just a classic example how at the local level, if there are things that folks are wanting, they let us know. It was overturned by the Clean Air and Water Act by the Supreme Court. And people felt it was strong enough about it that they lobbied the state legislature, and now we've got the state ban. The other thing, in terms of what Bill brought up, it's that that level playing field, but as well as opportunity, because Iowa's minimum wage is $7.25, but if you're in a Scott County or in Clinton, Iowa, down in Keokuk, Burlington, Illinois' minimum wage is $12 an hour. So people who live in those counties, they may live in Iowa, go work across the river, and then we don't have some workers for our area, or down on the southern border of Iowa. Missouri's minimum wage, at least last I knew, was just a little over $11 an hour.
Yeah, and on that minimum wage proposal, and for those who are listening, and forgive me, I don't remember the year right off the top of my head, Ross, maybe, or any gentleman, maybe you do, but there was a proposal to increase Iowa's, or I'm sorry, there were some local governments, as Bill noted, that had started the process of increasing their minimum wage, and the state legislature stepped in and essentially overruled those past legislation that said that they can't do that there has to be one statewide minimum wage. And that is the exact kind of debate and discussion that gets at the heart of what we're talking about here today. I wanted to ask, but I might be preaching to the choir here. When we hear discussions about a federal minimum wage, one of the arguments is always, well, increasing that to a certain number doesn't make sense because what you pay someone who's working and living in New York or California isn't the same as paying a worker and someone who lives in Iowa. And I'm wondering why that doesn't always also apply to Iowa. What you pay for someone who's working and living in Des Moines may be someone who's living in other areas of the state don't need as much. Does anybody have, that would be my question to folks, but like I said, I may be preaching to the choir that's assembled for that one.
Well, Erin, I don't know if you want to get me started down that track, but here is my thought. We rely too heavily on the next level of government to meet the needs of our communities. For example, we're always looking for federal support for everything. And granted, there are wealth disparities, but it seems to me if local decision makers, through the use of local control, had the ability to make more decisions and to fund those decisions, then we would be a lot better off, because we would lose a lot less revenue to someone else touching it before it gets back to the hands of a local official to deliver it. So I don't know. I'm unapologetically supportive of local decision makers. Are they always going to make the right decision? No. They're human. They're They're imperfect like all of us, but when they do, they're generally going to pay for it in the next election.
I was just going to say that's what elections are for, then, right?
I go
Sorry,
back
go
to
ahead,
the
Russ.
notion, I go back to the notion, or at least the concept of state law being setting the floor for certain areas, and the example of the wage was one example. And it gets back at as a state, what do in terms of whether it's wage or certain areas, do we want to have consistency across the state? Because and going back to kind of the local level, I remember an issue in a university town, Iowa City at the time, impacted by just the volumes of underage drinking. And at the local level, trying to address that wasn't an issue for areas where they don't necessarily have the volume of young people involved. And my predecessor at mayor told all the local bars and restaurants, you come up with a solution or we will. And they couldn't agree amongst themselves. They came back and said, we can't agree. And therefore, it was a request to have the next level of government provide that level playing field.
All right. I wanted to do here to kind of dovetail off that discussion about where we find that line. I have a quote here that I'm going to read you all, and it was from a debate during this past legislative session over a bill in which local control became an issue, and this one was legislation, and this bill eventually did pass and became law, and it prohibits cities and counties from using zoning regulations to prevent where fireworks can be sold. So some cities had been creating certain zones where fireworks could not be sold, and this state law essentially took away cities and counties' ability to do this. So during that debate, I have a quote here from Senator Mike Clemish, who's a Republican, and again, like Ross, he's a current state legislator and a former mayor. Mike was the mayor of the small town of Spillville. And during that debate, he said, what this bill does is provide a check to cities that are trying to use spot zoning as an attempt to do an end run around the state law. And he went on to say, I have been a mayor of a small town for 20 years. You won't find a much more staunch advocate of local control. However, there are times the legislature needs to step in and say, what you're doing locally defies the spirit of the law that we passed. I wanted to go through and Ross, will start with you because you were in the chamber. That's in the other chamber, but you're in the Capitol. Is that a fair assessment from Senator Clemish, or do you have a different perspective on either on that proposal, that law specifically, or the issue more broadly?
Getting back to that notion of the level playing field and what's the public interest, what's the public good in terms of local control in this area of fireworks. Maybe in a smaller town, you're not going to have whether it's noise or just the danger, the number of people that end up in hospitals. If someone is in a smaller county that does not have a hospital, and around the 4th of July, we're getting, to get graphic, but fingers blown off and people, eye injuries, that type of thing, that they're having to go to another county, and so that action is having an economic as well as just a healthcare hazard potentially for folks, and whether it gets into the sales of where it's available, and I'm conflating the two different issues that came up, because one was where you can sell, and it's like what there's that common sense that folks say, what difference, what good does it do to be able to sell in an area if you can't use them there? And that's again, there's no easy answers, but I think you also have to look at the impact beyond your community.
Yeah. Alan Kemp, let me ask you this next, because I know this cities have been very much in the discussion about not just this specific fireworks law, but going back to when the debate over and when they were first legalized a few years back, and then when can they be set off, what days, and now this one, where can they be sold? So this is this topic more broadly is a great example of this discussion. To either Senator Klimish's comments or this topic more broadly, what have your members and what's your perspective on this issue?
Fireworks touches on a number of issues at the local level, and for that reason, city officials have been very much engaged in this because they get pulled into this. On the issue of zoning, honestly, there's already processes in the law that prohibit cities from just spot zoning. I mean, cities, traditionally have had control over planning and zoning, and that they can make determinations as to how properties should be utilized in their communities, and they do it for any number of reasons. The highest of which is, public safety. And so, cities argued, look, notwithstanding whether, you're in favor of fireworks or opposed to fireworks, there are clearly public safety issues here that, where you're selling these has to be someplace that's safe. Should the unfortunate, a fire start or something like this. The same thing. I mean, we don't, cities aren't allowed, you don't allow just to put gas stations on whatever corner you want, or, propane storage areas. Why? Volatility of what they're selling. And so, again, this historically, zoning has always been something that cities looked at, and density matters. If you're the city of Spillville, yeah, you know what? They may or may not even have zoning, and so they just put it on an area of the edge of town, and it's not close to anything that would, likely be damaged in the unfortunate event that an explosion would occur. That's not the case if you're looking at cities with densities like Des Moines, Cedar Rapids, or even, places like Spencer. So that's the reason that cities were very much opposed. Like, we need to have some regulations to say the ability to regulate this on a health and safety standpoint. So, and then the other action, of course, gets the decision to legalize fireworks really put pressure on public safety, as Ross alludes to. First of all, the response to individuals who injure themselves, plus the sheer number of calls that come in to police departments, when these fireworks are going off, and the time has now lapsed when it's legal to set those off, or it's before or after even the dates that were set by the state code, and this ends up being a cost that cities have had to bear. So this is probably, I have to admit, fireworks is probably one of the issues that has most amped up the membership in terms, and it's all very practical issues of how to regulate.
Yeah, and let me stay with you a little bit, Alan, because one of the things I wanted to ask you and Bill in particular about is, so obviously you've had members who have had concerns about some of these statewide measures regarding fireworks that have been put in place. Well, you kind of touched on there, but expand on that if you would. The tangible impact. So what does that mean now? What are local governments having to adjust about the way they operate and the services they provide with something like this that they may not have otherwise done if it had been left up just to them?
I think if you probably speak with the city of Des Moines, what they've had to over the last couple of years with fireworks is they've really had to increase the number of police officers that are on duty during those times when fireworks can be used. And the reason is they're getting all these calls. And so then they faced criticism that they weren't, stringently enforcing these. And so it really has put cities, in a very difficult position that they have little control, over this, now that it's a state law allowing for fireworks, and even though they can choose to regulate or not regulate, it just puts pressure on them in ways that I think people did not anticipate. And I just remember articles on, like I said, the City of Des Moines Police Department. They received, all these calls. They have to have people go out and take a look at them. And even when they did that, they were still criticized for not, issuing tickets for it. And so I think this is one of those areas that city officials are feeling like we're in a no-win situation for something that we did not create.
Yeah. Bill Peterson, I don't know, and you can tell me how much if the fireworks issue has been as much a focus for the counties as it has for the cities, or maybe if not, if there's another issue that's come up before the legislature in recent years that counties just didn't have the appetite for and now are having to deal with. Is that fireworks, or is there a better example that you can think of off the top of your head?
I'm sure that there have been a few counties that have adopted fireworks ordinance, but I think that's primarily an issue that the cities have been dealing with, because the fireworks vendors are interested. If they want to put a location, they're not going to put it out in the middle of Adams County, which is our smallest county. They want to put it probably in Corning, where there's some people living. But there have been some preemption issues regarding zoning issues for counties, which is always concerning to our members. That I think there's roughly about 3/4 of the counties that have put in place a zoning ordinance to manage things within their county. One issue in particular has to do with zoning regulations in ag buildings and other things. Often ag is sort of put outside the box of local zoning officials having the ability to regulate things, but individuals that live in rural residence houses on farms and stuff, they should have the same protections of some minimum building codes and standards that someone that lives in a city. It's a public health issue. So there are issues like that. An upcoming issue, I think, that maybe hasn't reached the legislature yet, or I think there was some discussion about it last year, and it could impact on county zoning in particular, are these carbon pipelines that are being planned to snake across the counties in the state of Iowa. There's a couple of concerns. First of all, the impact on local roads and those things where those pipelines are going through. But there is a significant growing concern amongst rural residents, particularly agricultural landowners, about the impact of that construction on their land and the diminished productivity that takes place. There was a study done after the Dakota Access Pipeline, which was an oil pipeline. It wasn't a carbon pipeline, about the length of time it takes land to recover when construction takes place. Now, where does this fit into a county and their zoning? Well, counties have a responsibility in statute to inspect the pipelines, is hire an inspector of the pipeline construction as it's going through, and make sure that that land is restored to its previous condition. And, it's been shown that it takes several years for that land to recover when a pipeline goes through it. Now, there is compensation that goes to that landowner. Obviously, folks are very concerned that the use of eminent domain in a case like this is something that has come up. But the county, as I said, does have responsibility for inspecting that. And the question will be, are they preempted from enabling those inspectors to say, stop construction during certain periods where the soil might be too wet, which if it's too wet, it increases compaction on the soil and it delays the amount of time that that agricultural land recovers. So, I think that's probably an issue that's going to be coming up and reviewed, but it does come down to that local decision making and the ability of putting in place some sort of a local ordinance that would identify when too much is too much and when things need to be stopped. But
yeah, that's such an interesting topic. I'm glad you mentioned that, Bill. And I want to follow up with you with one quick question, and then we have a couple questions from viewers here that I want to get to as well. But real quick, Bill, on the pipelines, and you mentioned some of the decisions that are facing local officials right now. And another one is, and you mentioned eminent domain, and that there's a debate about that, and as you mentioned, the appropriate use of it. And a question of, should there be, a statewide tightening of when eminent domain should be allowed? It sounds like from folks that I talked to, as for right now, state legislatures, especially Republicans in the majority party at the Capitol going into the election anyways, are content to leave that. This is one where they're content to leave that decision locally. There doesn't seem to be an appetite to tackle that from a statewide level. I'm curious if you've heard from your members, is that something counties want in their court? Or sorry,
yeah, Erin, I think in this case, the decision is not a county by county ability to use eminent domain, since this is a project that goes across the entire state. So in this case, I would say it's not appropriate for the county to make that decision on eminent domain. However, in this case, if it's allowed to be used, it's the Iowa Utilities Board that makes that decision. So here is the question that my members are asking. So does this meet the definition of a public purpose? And I think that's a critical component of whether or not eminent domain is used. Now, counties can use eminent domain in some circumstances, and I believe cities in certain areas in regard to road right-of-way and other things, they rarely like to use that because it's probably one of the least popular things that they can do. Obviously, the state has the ability to use eminent domain in their decisions to construct highways and interstates and other sorts of things. So I think the fundamental question is, do these carbon pipelines meet the definition of public purpose? And the Iowa State Association of County Supervisors have approved their legislative package. They have a policy that said they don't believe that it meets a public purpose standard, that they believe this is more of a private purpose. So that's an issue that will have to be decided. It's a difficult call. Is running carbon through a pipeline different than running oil? But we'll have to see. There have been a number of counties that have intervened with the Iowa Utilities Board related to this, and they've intervened really on local control and zoning issues that not necessarily saying we don't think you can use eminent domain, but they've said we have local zoning ordinances that regulate how close, say, a pipeline could be to a city. If a city, Ellen can help me out here, there's like the 2-mile limit in the city that they might impact in their zoning regulation if they have zoning. If they don't, the city isn't zoned, then I think the county has authority right up to the boundary of the city. But they want to make sure that those sorts of things are protected. And some of those things are embedded in their local ordinance.
All right, thanks for that. Great discussion, interesting stuff. In the last few minutes we have here, I wanted to get to a couple of reader questions, and we have one that's first directed to Alan Kemp with the League of Cities. But if either Bill or Ross, you have anything to add, please do. I have to be honest. I have to plead ignorance on some of the terminology in this question. It's above my pay grade, which isn't necessarily difficult to do. So I don't know if this applies to anyone else or not, but for Alan, can you highlight for us how our local officials can better prepare themselves to serve their cities through CEMO? And if you could explain to all of us what CEMO is, Alan, and MLA courses, and how the Iowa League of City offers regular opportunities for engagement.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that the league does is provide not only technical assistance but education. And so CMO is our program we set up. It's called the Certified Elected Municipal Official Program. And really what it was designed to do is sort of recognize and acknowledge city officials who had taken a minimum set of courses that we offer. And then MLA is our Municipal Leadership Academy. That's what we offer following the November city elections. And again, it's designed to give city officials instruction on how to govern. You got to remember, no one goes to college to become a mayor or a city council member. You sort of jump in, and individuals bring in, their own set of experiences and expertise. And so our ideas with the league is we at least get them started on the minimum basis. And so that is true. I mean, I think, if you're a city official, and Ross knows this as well as anyone, having been a mayor, is you have to put some time in to get some minimum training so you begin to understand, so then you can effectively deliberate, in the council or with the council to get things accomplished.
Okay, so we're talking about like training and resources for city officials. Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
I will add, I did go through that my first year on city council back in 2000. It was extremely valuable in two different ways. One, just in terms of the content, two, with the networking, and three, perspective, because some of the issues that we came across in Iowa City required that I have more in-depth knowledge than things that would come across. It just, some of the questions that my fellow colleagues in city councils in smaller communities, I mean, I knew many of the answers to, but they didn't even know, just because of, no experience with that. So it was extremely bad. And I think I'm pretty sure the county has an equivalent training for their supervisors, but Bill could address that.
Yes. So recently, the Iowa State Association of County Supervisors instituted a program called the Certified County Supervisor, and it's a self-directed, self-governed process. But one of the things that many of the longer-term supervisors realize is it does take them a period of time to really understand the details of what their job is and what they can do and what they can't do. We start folks out with what's called the New County Officer School for newly elected officials. And it covers things like ethics and open meetings and open records, and those sorts of things. But it also helps individuals, particularly on boards of supervisors, understand that there's a lot of statute and rules and regulations that apply to their job that they didn't realize when they ran for election. So, they sometimes they're astounded that they don't have as much authority as they thought they did to, tackle some problems. So it is a challenge, but we thought it was important, and I think the league has done a great job in this area of training and education, and we've certainly tried to learn from some of their programs to make sure that people understand their roles, but also understand what it takes to be a leader in local government. And I suppose the other aspect of it, as Ross mentioned, is making those connections of individuals that are across the state that are going to face similar local problems, and being understand how solutions to those problems were developed and accomplished.
All right, we're in our last minute here, so just real quick, we had one more question, which I think is okay that we're not going to really get to because I think we fairly well covered it in our discussion. But I'll fire this question off, and maybe Ross, in your best 30 seconds, give you an opportunity. I think you're best tailored to field this one to wrap us up here and put a pin in this one. So the question comes from Sean, and he says, in 2017, the legislature preempted local workforce measures, including the minimum wage, fair scheduling laws, paid leave requirements, and project labor agreements. These policies have had positive outcomes in many localities. So here's the question to you, Ross. What are your views on state preemptions like these? I think we know that answer, but maybe here, what can be done to regain local control? In a quick summary, Ross, how would you answer that?
Related to that particular area, or just broadly speaking?
I think broadly speaking, maybe.
Okay. You got to talk. I mean, sometimes, and I get it. It's tempted to not be willing to come forward to state a position because whether one party's in majority or not. But I mean, it cuts. I hear from both parties and no parties. City managers and county folks that they've not registered because of concern of retribution. But the more people are willing to come forward and states so that this is important and critical for our community and for Iowa, then I would encourage you to do that.
Talk to those elected officials. We talk about it all the time.
And get them to talk to us.
There you go. There you go. That's all the time we have for this. Thank you, gentlemen, so much. I want to thank again Bill Peterson with the State Association of Counties, Alan Kemp with the League of Cities, and state legislator and former Mayor Ross Wilburn. Thank you, gentlemen, so much for joining us today. Very much appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.
And thanks to all of you who tuned in and followed the discussion. There's so much more going on throughout the rest of the day and tomorrow here on Iowa Ideas. So stick with us, find another topic that you're interested in, and maintain the discussion with us. We're glad you were here, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, everybody.